Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for the organisers for inviting me. And I'm not sure I was given a topic of what to talk about, so I selected to talk about progress towards elimination of some neglected tropical diseases by 2020. So what are neglected tropical diseases? Well, 15 years ago, HIV, malaria and TB were neglected tropical diseases. They're not today. Today, we have a group of 14 core neglected tropical diseases, and Sue will be very pleased to see in the top left-hand corner, human African trypanosomiasis, which I'm not going to talk about. But there are also a group of helminth infections and a bacterial infection trachoma, which are highlighted in red. And the reason they're highlighted in red is because those diseases, or those 7 organisms, are susceptible to drugs that we have. They're susceptible to drugs which only have to be given once a year, and the drugs that we give are not completely but mostly very, very safe. They also are diseases which it's more cheap to treat than it is to diagnose. At the bottom is Dracunculiasis, which is guinea worm. And if I had an hour to talk, I'd show you a lovely film of a guinea worm coming out. That is a disease which is very close to eradication, I'm pleased to say. The top 3 drugs, the top 3 diseases, HAT, Chagas and Leishmaniasis, we need better drugs for. Leprosy is well under control. Borrelia also is perhaps even more neglected than the other neglected ones, but I'm going to stick to the ones in red for this 15 minutes. Advocacy. That's the first thing, because without advocacy, we're not going to get political will, particularly with these neglected tropical diseases. Now, that term was only actually coined about 7 or 8 years ago. The example here is Schistosomiasis, bilharzia, which is the one that I work on, and Francesca too. And this year at the World Health Assembly, every African Minister of Health signed up to the fact that they're going to try and eliminate schistosomiasis. There are 200 million people in Africa infected with schistosomiasis. And by 2020, I'm going to predict that we will not eliminate schistosomiasis, but the World Health Organization and the member states have signed up to trying. There are a number of other World Health Assembly resolutions dating back 15 years. Elimination of lymphatic filariasis, that's one of my diseases in red. Global elimination of blinding trachoma, another one. Prevention of avoidable blindness and visual impairment, which includes trachoma, but also river blindness, onchocerciasis. And then Chagas disease, control and elimination, and eradication of guinea worm, Dracunculiasis, which I've already mentioned. So how many people are we talking about with these drugs that I mentioned? Well, for schistosomiasis, it's estimated that if we're going to eliminate it just by mass drug administration, we would need to treat 236 million people every year or every other year between now and 2020. And our coverage at the moment is down to a paltry, or up, I should say, to a paltry 13%. So in 2010, 13% of the number of people who needed treatment actually received it. For soil-transmitted helminths, the 3 worms, Trichuris, Ascaris and hookworm, we're up to about 30%, and you can see that that is quite a dramatic increase over the last few years, and there's a reason for that. Lymphatic filariasis, 1.3 billion people need to be treated every year for 6 years in order to eliminate this disease. Now, I haven't got time to go into the various life cycles and why this works. But look at that. Almost 50% of the people who need treating are receiving treatment every year. That means we are treating 500 million people every year with 2 drugs, albendazole and mectizan, in order to control lymphatic filariasis. We are treating 500 million people every year. For onchocerciasis, the number of people who need treating is relatively lower. It's 123 million. But for the last 25 years, getting on for 80% of the people in Africa who live in endemic zones for river blindness have been given a free drug every year donated by Merck. Trachoma, sorry Jack, they're a bit low down there for the trachoma coverage yet. It has been going up and up and up. Zithromax is the drug which is used to control trachoma with mass drug administration, and every tablet that's given is donated by Pfizer. So let me just go through the pharmaceutical industry's contribution, because the neglected tropical diseases would not be treated at all. And in fact, in the year 2000, only river blindness was being treated virtually. So we have a number of pharmaceutical companies. Merck, this is an American company, Merck & Co., and they have recently reconfirmed their commitment. They've offered in 1986 to donate as much Mectizan as was needed to control onchocerciasis in Africa. 15 years later, it was found that Mectizan also, in conjunction with albendazole, worked to control lymphatic filariasis, and the mode of action is to sterilize the adult worms, not to kill them. So they have to be given over a long period of time to prevent the larvae and therefore the transmission. So Merck then extended their donation to include lymphatic filariasis. GlaxoSmithKline, I've already mentioned how many tablets are being delivered every year. They have already donated over 2 billion tablets, and in October 2010, they committed to give albendazole not only for lymphatic filariasis, but also for deworming, which is why the deworming tablets coverage is going up and up and up. Actually, GSK have built a factory in South Africa, which produces 1 billion tablets of albendazole every year, and they give them away. They give them away globally for the intestinal helminths, which over 1 billion people, 1 in 6 of this population of the world are infected with, and half a billion for lymphatic filariasis, because that's the number of people who actually live in endemic areas. Johnson & Johnson produced mebendazole, another deworming tablet, and perhaps in response to GSK, who knows? They have recently increased their donation to 200 million tablets a year. So there's an awful lot of tablets floating around which can be given out to children with worms. Pfizer originally committed to provide 120 million doses of zithromycin for trachoma. That was back in about 1999, I think. And last year, their number of doses delivered free of charge by them throughout the world were 70 million. And yet, if you remember, the treatment still needs to reach out to many more people. For leprosy, I just mentioned briefly, the multi-drug therapy is donated by Novartis. Another company probably unknown to you is SI, and that's a Japanese company which has come in just very, very recently with a new donation of diethyl carbamate, which is used for lymphatic filariasis outside of Africa in conjunction with albendazole. And Merck, which is a completely different company, it's the German Merck, originally committed to donating 200 million tablets of praziquantel over 10 years against schistosomiasis, which sounds a lot of tablets, but actually it's only enough to treat 6 million children a year. And over the last year or two, there's been a little bit of a pressure. It's been very obvious that schisto is a gap in the drug donation, and Merck have stepped up to the plate, and in that January London Declaration, which one of the previous speakers mentioned, the CEO of Merck stood up and said that he was going to commit to increase his donation to 250 million tablets a year, at least until 2020, which means that we will have enough praziquantel in our hands, free of charge, to treat 100 million school-age children in Africa every year from now till then, once they rack up their donation. So I think it's very obvious to you all that the pharmaceutical industry is the backbone, in a way, of this push towards the elimination of neglected tropical diseases. We've had some success stories, and it's because of these success stories that we've been able to encourage donors to come forward in addition to fund the delivery of these drugs. So top left, lymphatic filariasis has been treated for 6 years with every individual living in the 2 islands of Pemba and Unguja receiving mectizan and albendazole, and lymphatic filariasis is no longer transmitted on Zanzibar. Trachoma in Morocco, this was the first country that went for elimination. Trachoma has been eliminated from Morocco. Schistosomiasis in Egypt over a 15-year period, not because of donated praziquantel by the pharmaceutical industry, but a program funded by the World Bank and USAID. The prevalence of schistosomiasis in Egypt has gone down from something like 60% back in the 1960s, and now the Ministry of Health are announcing that it's down below 5%, which means it certainly isn't a public health problem. In fact, bladder cancer in Egypt 30 years ago was the most prevalent cancer, and you will not find bladder cancer due to Schistosoma hematobium anywhere in Egypt today. And finally, the guinea worm I've already mentioned. So as far as schistosomiasis is concerned, we have to hit the big, what we call the elephants of Africa, if you like, and Zimbabwe isn't an elephant in Africa. It's just a tiny country compared to some of the numbers here. Nigeria, Tanzania, the DRC. There are virtually no treatments going on in those countries, and Ethiopia is another one. They haven't even started yet. But many of the, what we call the low-hanging fruits, the countries with good governance, have all got really good programs going. And the effect on the schistosomiasis intensity, the morbidity, has very much been reduced. You've heard SCI mentioned, and just a brief advertisement of what we do and where we work. We have been running, thanks to the Gates Foundation, money from USAID, a philanthropy organization called Geneva Global, and DFID have all over the last 12 years given us funding, so that we're covering a good portion of Africa. Although I have to say the green ones, DRC, Ethiopia and Senegal, we're only just starting in. But we have done an awful lot of treatments, and currently we're treating 50 million children a year for either schistosomiasis or intestinal helminths. But as you can see, there's a lot of Africa that we're not yet working in, and those are the big gaps. So how are we going to go for elimination? Do we actually have the knowledge that we need? Yes, we've controlled morbidity because we've given these drugs, and that has meant that a lot of the worms have been killed, but there is still an awful lot left. So once we've eliminated it as a public health problem, as we've done in those low-hanging fruit countries, can we go for elimination? Should we go for elimination? If we've got limited resources, should we put it in the countries to eliminate, or should we try and reach out to the countries that have never treated anybody and the people there are really very heavily infected? And these are the sort of problems and policy problems that we've got to work on. And then we've got the technical challenges. It's all very well giving out pills. Treating school children is easy. You've got a captive audience, you can train the teachers, and they will give out the pills. Treating children who are not at school is relatively easy because they're available in their houses, and community drug distributors can go around and can deliver the drugs. But the people who've left school, the adolescents, the young people who've never been treated, have got very serious schistosomiasis infections, for instance, and are going to go on and die in their late 20s and 30s. How do we reach them? It's very, very difficult. We need evidence in order to persuade the governments that they should support it. And the example that Francesca gave is actually an exception. The Zimbabwean government have responded to their people and want to treat schistosomiasis. In most of the countries where we go to, politicians don't get schistosomiasis. They don't even know, in many cases, what they are in the capital cities. And so we have to do a lot of advocacy to get things going. And then we have to do more than just treat people to prevent the disease. And two examples where we've really got to, if we're going to reduce the morbidity, is we've got to operate. And one is trachoma, and I'm not sure if you can, let's see if I can use, trachoma is caused by a chlamydia infection which causes conjunctivitis. And at the end of the conjunctivitis, the eyelid is distorted so that these eyelashes are bending down and scraping the cornea. That's what causes blindness. If ever there was a preventable cause of blindness, that's it. And this is lymphatic filariasis, which is a pretty horrible thing. I've shown this so that the people who have dinner with me won't eat quite so much tonight. Now we'll get plenty to eat. But that's pretty horrific. And yet, it's a before and after, and the operation costs $50. We have 8,000 men in Niger queuing up to have this operation. And funding just isn't available for it. But we're working through at a rate of about 600 a year. So elimination of morbidity is well on the way. Elimination of one or two of the diseases and almost eradication is close. I haven't mentioned polio, but polio is very close to eradication, and so is guinea worm. Trachoma and lymphatic filariasis and river blindness could well be close to elimination by 2020. Schistosomiasis and intestinal worms, I think we're going to need partnerships. We're going to need more than just drugs. We're going to need water and sanitation. But if any of this does happen, it will be because of a large combination of partners. First of all these programs belong to the countries. They've got to belong to the countries. They've got to be persuaded that they want them and how they're going to do it. The pharmaceutical industry I have described, everybody thinks of them as the bad guys, but for us, they're the good guys. The World Health Organization, Advocacy, and the World Bank for money, NGOs for delivering the drugs, and then these donors that are highlighted here, without which we wouldn't be able to do our work. So I'm very hopeful. I think we might be able to eliminate, and we certainly will be eliminating an awful lot of the suffering of the people in Africa. Thank you.